What has been the closest thing to changing your mind on the idea of God?
Graham Oppy's work. Very brilliant. He gives a really good account of how things could work without God in terms of just the foundation of the universe, contingency. I mean, you can't just take it lightly. He put a lot of effort and thought into it.
Professor Graham Oppy, you've been involved in the study of religion, of philosophy of religion for 30 years. You've got many books to your name, groundbreaking books as well. So I guess my first question, and this may be a yes or no, but is there a God?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Right. I mean, that's the right answer to give, because obviously it would be weird for me to claim that I knew the answer to that question and that everyone else should just accept what I say.
Yeah.
It's one of the most controversial questions amongst people.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's so controversial?
Well, there's a bunch of ways you could try to answer that. Mm-hmm. One thing to think about is just history. Mm. So it's always been controversial. There've been clashes forever between people who follow different religions. Mm. But there's a very long history of, how will I put it, of in the UK and Europe, so in the Christian parts of the world, of not being awfully fond of people who are not believers.
Mm. Mm. How do we even approach a question like that?
So most of us, in a way, don't approach it because our beliefs get formed when we're very young and we persist with them.
Yeah.
Like, that's not true for you and me, but it's true for lots of people. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, a kind of interesting question is how we go about discussing it when there are such firm convictions on both sides. And what are the ground rules for discussion, and what is it reasonable to expect that the other person that you're talking to is going to be able to give you, right? So if my goal is to convince you of a position, it's really not clear what the best strategy is going to be. I think that more often the conversations are productive if we're just kind of learning about the views of other people. And so the kind of questions you ask, what reasons do you have for saying that, or why does it seem to you that that's the case? And often the answer will be, I don't know, it just seems right to me.
Yeah, that's...
A quick thing while I've got you. Deep Drinks is now on a semi-irregular basis. Don't worry, it's not going anywhere. But while I can't be super consistent with the episode schedule, I've simplified memberships down to just one channel tier. It's basically support me with the cost of a coffee each month so I can keep making deep drinks. You'll get a bunch of benefits and your name will be immortalized at the end of each episode. Think about that. When future historians are referencing the greatest and most important podcasts of all time, your name could be eternally etched into its existence as a financial backer. If that's something you'd like to do, you can do it here on YouTube or on Patreon, links in the description.
I was running through some of the questions I have for you with the people we're staying with, and they're the opposite of deep thinkers in philosophy. They don't think about deep things, as much as someone like myself or yourself, obviously. And I remember I asked him, I wrote down the quote. It's I asked him, I was like, well, where did we come from? His thing was like, well, I don't know. There was a bunch of planets and they smashed into each other, and that was it. And I was just like, a bunch of planets, like that's a fun way to describe cosmology. A bunch of planets smashed into each other and that was it. And it's, or I go, why do we exist? Just because, and you're like, okay. And that people are fine like that. My wife's a bit like that. She's like, when we kind of deconstructed our faith, it was like, I was like, I just discovered this thing, and it's breaking my brain. And my wife was like, she's just as a committed Christian as me. And she was like, oh wow, that is interesting. Anyway, would you like a cheese board? I'm making some, I'm going, what the, and for me, it's like, shakes my whole identity. But for others, they seem to, they just don't care and they just move on with their day, go watch the cricket or something.
So this planets smashing together is not too bad, really. So where did we come from? Well, we needed third generation stars to produce the carbon, right? So you've started fairly far down the track, but it's not hopelessly wrong to think there is enormous explosions that produced all of the elements that were necessary for a planet like the Earth
Well,
to form.
I can see that, but a lot of people will argue, well, there has to be a first cause. Like, where did it come from? Why did it come from? As far back as you go, eventually you get to a spot where it's like, well, this just happened because of the mathematical formations of the universe, and then you go, well, why was the mathematical formations of the universe like that? And I can't find a good answer on either side.
So I think that, I've talked about this quite a bit. I think that thinking about it very abstractly, there aren't that many options here. One is there was some stuff that just happened and there's no further explanation for it. Or there was stuff that had to happen. There was something necessary. And then everything else unfolds from that. And or you can say, well, there's always been something. So no matter how far back you go, you can go back further. Right. Now, that one's a bit, I think it's hardest to believe that one, but I don't rule it out entirely. Something just happened, right? There's a kind of contingency and there's no explanation for something, and then everything else is explained in terms of that. It isn't very satisfying.
No.
So I'd prefer to avoid that. And so eliminating the alternatives, I'm going to go for there was something that had to be. It's just that some people will think the thing that has to be is God, and other people will think the thing that had to be is just the initial state of the universe. And that thing, if you think that thing had to be, then you can trace everything back to that, and you have an explanation of why you've got that thing. You had it because you had to.
Yeah. It is interesting because I think when you go back to the Big Bang and things like that, and we start thinking about things like before the Big Bang, it doesn't really make sense because there was maybe that's when time started. So I think that when we start to think of things, and I'd like your thoughts on this because this is just my rambling thoughts, but if we get to we trace things right back to the start and we go, well, there had to have been a universe, or or God created. Yeah. We're loading in our 21st century understanding of time and everything. We're loading in our perception into something that it doesn't really work. Like even the thought there had to have been something is it's like we can't reach it. It's not attainable with that kind of language. Are you getting what I'm saying there? Or
so if there's an origin, a necessary origin, probably that's where time starts, but doesn't have to be. Maybe time comes a bit later. It's a kind of it requires a certain kind of complexity of structure to have time.
Yeah.
Because you need it's not just before and after, but you have a measure. So you can say, well, there's 2 seconds between here and here. So maybe at the beginning you didn't have enough structure for that. You just had a kind of cause and effect. So but you didn't. There wasn't anything that you could say about how much time elapsed, right? Because time doesn't emerge until you've got sufficient complexity. So I'm not completely sold on the idea that time has to go all the way back to the origin, but I think that causation probably does.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about. I like to think about reality in causal terms. So there'll be an initial state, and then you get kind of causal evolution from that state. And if you're a theist, you'll think that the initial state involves just God, and then God creates stuff, and that's the causal evolution that comes subsequently. But if you're like me, you'll just think, no, there's an initial state of the universe, and it just evolves.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw your interview, I believe, with Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic. It was fantastic, and you said something in that I think is kind of tangential to a point I'm trying to get across, which is I would have considered myself a lack theist. So I'm the kind of person who goes, I'm just not convinced. So when it comes to the origin of the universe, I go, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not convinced. We don't have a good answer yet, and I just kind of. But you kind of had this approach in that conversation when it came to atheism, where it kind of needs a justification as well. Like you kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of don't have the same opinion that a lacktheism version of atheism is enough.
So I think of the kind of lacktheism as really being agnosticism.
Okay.
Right. So you just haven't made up your mind about between a range of alternatives, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being agnostic. That's that's definitely a respectable position, but that's a suspension of judgment. Now the way that you characterised it wasn't quite like that. It was more you just don't want to think about it. But you've thought about it enough to know that you don't want to think about it anymore. And so I still think that you've adopted a kind of stance where you're thinking, I don't have sufficient reason to go one way or another.
Well, the way I like to think of it is if I had a jar of M&Ms and I said, is there an even number or an odd number of M&Ms? And we had no way of opening it up and tipping it out or using maths to work out the circumference. My answer could just be, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
like that.
Right, sure. And that's the agnostic's position.
Okay.
I don't know, right?
See,
so, and in that case, I would be an agnostic, unless, you're at your school fate and there's a prize for guessing the right answer, in which case I'm going to have a number.
You're going to have a go.
So
that's really interesting to me because I've always kind of wrestled with the agnostic atheist kind of term. I don't know I'm someone who lacks belief, but depending on who I'm talking to, I have to change my wording because some people will use belief as it's like you're barraging for your favorite team, you know what I mean? Whereas other people, and like, are you going for our team or not? That's how people will see belief. And then other people, like for me, I just go, well, am I convinced of the evidence for this claim or not? That's how I kind of view it. And under my paradigm, I couldn't understand how anyone could be an agnostic, like without knowledge, but not also be without belief. Because if you don't have the knowledge, how do you have the belief? That was my thinking of that. And you kind of threw a whole spanner in the work where you said, well, you've kind of changed my thinking about that and go, well, maybe I'm not an atheist. Maybe I'm agnostic or something. What would you characterize me based on what I'm saying?
So it's interesting. And I characterised myself as an agnostic for quite a while in the 1990s, and in my book on ontological arguments, I said that I was defending an agnostic position. And then I just decided that I preferred to use the terms differently, and that it would be better to characterise my view as atheist. Right?
So that means you hate God, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is that agnostics typically don't, right?
Yeah.
There's this uncertainty about the terms that you can see even in Bertrand Russell. So what Russell thought sometimes was that you had to be absolutely certain to be an atheist, and otherwise, if you just thought there was some uncertainty, the most you could be is an agnostic. And maybe part of what goes along with that is that Christianity often is couched in a way that makes it sound as though believers have to be certain, right? But lots of believers are not.
Yeah,
lots of believers are, if you ask them, maybe it's 99.99%, but it's not certainty.
Well, right? a lot of my old friends and family would say that if we had all the answers or if we were certain, we wouldn't need faith, and God wants us to have faith.
Right. So there's that point as well. Yeah. So I think that what I came to think was that tying atheism to certainty was just a mistake.
Yeah.
Right. And so then when it comes to the question, okay, so we're not certain, how much, how strong do you have to believe or lean a certain way before we say, well, you're not an agnostic anymore, you're actually an atheist.
Yeah.
And as you say, different people will make different judgments about that. And so you'll get classified by some people maybe as an agnostic and by others as an atheist.
I've been called an agnostic just because I'm nice about the conversation, where they go, well, you're not angry at religion. And I'm like, no, that has nothing to do with it.
Okay, but that shouldn't be relevant
exactly.
to the classification. The classification should be about your attitude towards claims like there's a God.
So you're an atheist, right? Under your paradigm.
Yeah, the way I think about it.
So why? So you're confident that there is no God?
Yeah.
Okay. And how do you arrive at that conclusion? I mean, sorry,
yeah.
everyone I should mention, you've got, what, almost 30 books or more than 30 books?
No, not that many.
A lot of books on this subject. If anyone wants to dive in deeper, the links will be in the description. So, but how do you arrive so confidently at a conclusion like that?
So I spent a lot of time thinking about a whole lot of related questions here. So questions about how to characterize God or gods, what properties God might have, and then what kinds of reasons do people give for believing in God? So what's the evidence? In other words, what's the evidence? And I've thought about that a lot, and my own judgment when I consider what I think are the best ways of thinking about God and judgments about the evidence is I'm pretty confident that there's no God.
Okay.
Given all of the relevant evidence, which is the evidence that people think supports God and the evidence that people think counts against God, because there are considerations that get advanced by people on both sides. The story I've told in various places, but probably my book, The Best Argument Against God, gives you a sense of how it seems to me. And I kind of emphasise in that book that I'm making a whole lot of judgments, and people might disagree with the judgments, and that's fine. So I don't think that this argument ought to persuade everybody else that there's no God, but it does explain why I think there isn't one.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I was listening to another one of your interviews on the way through here, and you said something about how people's beliefs kind of start like. Can you just explain a little bit again about how beliefs, you think beliefs are formed, like why people have beliefs? They kind of they don't start from, I guess, data points. They kind of find data points after the fact, right? Like you.
So I think lots of your beliefs about almost anything are formed on the basis of testimony. So other people tell you there's a God, right? And you believe it when you're 2 years old or 3 years old or 5 years old or whatever it is. And maybe you go to church and you go to Sunday school, as I did, right, for quite a few years, right? And for lots of people, there's nothing that disrupts that. And so you don't have any reason to start doubting the testimony of, or in fact, you don't even recall. You don't even know why how you came by the beliefs.
Yeah.
But some people get bitten by the philosophy bug and start worrying about whether you can justify the beliefs that you've got. In particular, these beliefs. And in this case, what might do it is looking around the world and seeing that there are people who spend their lives thinking about this stuff who've come to a different conclusion from the one that you've got. And then we can start arguing sort of so it is kind of a bit after the fact, about how strong the various arguments are, or how strong the various, what you call data points are.
It's very interesting that you say that, because like it brings up memories for me. In my deconstruction, part of it was we went to Japan. We're outside of a Shinto/Buddhist temple. I was worried that we might be infected by demons going to a place like that. I was part of a very Pentecostal church, but we went in, I was open-minded, and I was like, and I was watching people blow incense on their face as a cleansing ritual before going in. And I thought to myself, if I had like a spiritual scientific tool that I could measure and prove to people that nothing was happening in the spirit realm, would that make a difference to the tradition? And I thought, I don't know if it would. I don't know if it would matter, actually. I don't think that like, I think it's part of it, it's a tradition, it's a ritual. And that made me reflect on my beliefs and rituals and things like that, and prayer or praying for healing and things like that. And I went, like I was just like, well, how do I know, like, would it matter for me? Like in that, so it's interesting because I kind of like that. I came in to look at and saw other people's beliefs and was like, well, hang on, how do I rectify these beliefs with my beliefs? Like, why are they different and things like that? Yeah, it's interesting.
So that kind of thing's been quite important historically, and it does matter to lots of people. It's much easier if you live in a little village and you never leave it and everybody thinks the same thing, right? But one of the things that people used to say back in the 16th and 17th century as a kind of strong reason for believing in God is that everybody does.
Mm.
Right? Well, when travellers went to China and came back with the information that actually there were lots of people who didn't, that was actually a problem for that argument.
Yeah.
Right? And it was one of many things that contributed to the eventual loosening of the influence of the church across Europe and the UK, something that took centuries, but happened sort of gradually and then it sort of snowballed a bit in the 20th century.
You decided that you no longer believed in God when you were quite young. Was it 12 or 13 or something?
Something like that, yeah.
And something that I know you've been on Alex O'Connor's channel and something he's mentioned in passing, that a lot of his kind of hard out work, kind of convincing people that maybe religion isn't true in his earlier videos and stuff, he had people reach out to him and say, okay, I no longer believe in God, but now what? I don't have purpose. And they became quite nihilistic in quite a negative way. And I went through a season of that personally last year when my son was born, and I realized, oh no, like, well, it was a couple of years ago now, but when he turned 1, I was like, oh no, when I go, I'm going to be saying goodbye to him and my wife forever. And that was like a rationalization that I didn't kind of realize until, and that really scared me. And I would have done anything for the love of God at that moment, but I just couldn't get myself to believe. I couldn't trick myself, you know. So I guess I just wanted to quickly ask you about nihilism and about that. You know, do you see that in people who maybe deconstruct from their religion or who take atheism quite seriously as a study? Do they tend to become nihilistic, or do you find that they might lack purpose, or do you think that's part of converting from fundamentalism to?
Yeah, so that's a kind of interesting question. It depends on the person, how deeply ingrained your values are, and how much. So I think it would be surprising if your morality depended so much on your religious believing. So that, you know, take away the religion and now you're happy to steal from shops and things like that. That seems really weird to me.
Yeah.
It's not like that's what happened to me when I stopped believing. Right? And to some extent, I think that those ideas are kind of ideology. They're not grounded in any kind of fact. So I've written about this a little bit. There are interesting studies you can do these days because we're measured so much. There's so much data. So particularly in the United States, you can do these studies where you can look at neighbourhoods that are Christian and neighbourhoods that are not. And then you can compare them for things like divorce rates and incarceration rates and a whole lot of things. And it turns out that there's no evidence that the religious people are better than the non-religious people. And that's what I would have predicted in advance.
Yeah.
Right.
That's quite interesting. Yeah, I've heard studies like that. Of course, a lot of my friends will in the Christian apologetic sphere will refute it by some other study or something. But yeah, I've heard studies like that, or Japan has, like, it's quite secular and has like the lowest rate of, you know, a bunch of these.
Right.
things.
So I mean, of course, if you cherry pick things, like incarceration rates are through the roof in the United States. Like you can, and it's a very Christian country. It's important that you get a big basket of these measures, because otherwise, as you say, Japan or Scandinavia just looks places with quite low levels. But that would be not taking enough of the data into account. What I think is, if you take all the data into account, it comes out much more that people are pretty similar.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's quite interesting. So, all right, I want to jump a little bit back into the God question, but I want to say, okay, you've got this conviction that atheism, I guess, that there is no God. So what do you say to someone who comes up to you and says, well, you know, we have testimony from, you know, multiple authors about this Son of God that died and rose from the dead, and we have this whole religious movement that started from people who were being persecuted by the Romans. They sacrificed their lives for this, and you know, there's you know, countless testimony throughout the ages moving forward there of miracles and apparitions of Mary and everything like that. What do you say to someone who says, well, how do you account for something like Christianity if Jesus didn't rise from the dead?
So the thing to do to start with is to say we need to broaden the evidence base. There's a lot of other religions, so let's think about Islam, let's think about Buddhism, because these are two of the other missionary religions. They have lots of miracles associated with them, they have old texts, all kinds of stuff. What are you going to say about them? What's your explanation for them? And in particular, what's special about, pick any one of them compared to the other two? And I've just said three, but actually there are thousands of religions and they all have their stories and so on. Now, there are two ways you can go at this point. One is you can say, well, they're all true. That's hard to sustain because they disagree with one another. The other thing you can say is, I've got a story about what went wrong in the case of the Muslims and the Buddhists and all the rest of them. But that story is surely going to be a story that will be adaptable to your religion too. Like, they've got all these stories about miracles, but they're false, right?
Well,
because of but if you think about the Hadith in Islam, right? There are purportedly these long chains of testimony that take you back to various sayings of the Prophet that are authenticated because every step in the chain is authenticated. Muslims will say that's much better attestation than anything that you get in Christianity because you've got a small number of books written a very long time ago. It's not clear how independent they are, the accounts are of one another, and so on. Right. Now, I'm going to tell a general story about all of the religions, and I'm not going to make a special case to exclude one of them. So just kind of thinking about it from this very general perspective, I don't think that I'm in any trouble, right? I think the problem here is for the believers in the particular religion. That's how I think about it.
It's very. I really love, and I wonder if you could talk about this. Hume. I really love what he said about miracles.
Right, so I just borrowed. This is just a kind of amplification of the second thing that he says about miracles, not the first thing, the kind of a priori argument that it's kind of, we know that miracles are impossible sort of as a matter of definition. But the other thing, the thing about how weak the testimony on behalf of miracles always turns out to be when you look at it carefully. Right? How many independent testifiers have you got? How reliable are they? How do we know that they're reliable? Right? A whole lot of questions like that come up in every case. Right?
I would love if you could just give us an overview of naturalism. Pretend I am 5. I know it's hard for a philosopher, but how do you? What is naturalism, and why do you think it works better than injecting a supernatural agent or force?
So think about causal reality, the network of all the things that causally interact with one another over the whole of history, from the very beginning to the very end. Theists and naturalists both believe in causal reality. I mean, maybe Hume didn't, right? Maybe there are some non-theists who don't believe in causation, but theists tend to believe in causation because they tend to think of God as the cause of, as the first cause, and so on. Okay, so now think about the accounts that you might give of causal reality. One view that you might have is that all there is in it is natural causal objects and natural causal properties, the kinds of objects and properties that in principle you can describe in terms of the sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, human sciences. Maybe you need the social sciences too. Maybe there are, sociological causes or historical causes, or whatever. Anyway, but that's all you need, right? That's the naturalist view, right? So that causal reality is just natural objects and with natural causal properties of the kind that are amenable to investigation by the sciences. Right? So this includes psychological properties because after all we have psychological sciences. Right? Some people might think that you can't have a science of the mind, but I think that that's not the view that psychologists have, for example. Okay, so the competing position adds some more causal stuff. So God's interventions into the natural causal order, maybe angels and demons, other agents of God that the naturalist doesn't believe in, that are not part of, in their view, is not part of causal reality. There's not a complete view of everything. I said nothing about values, for example, in this, right? But the naturalism has to do, in my view, with what you say about causal reality.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the view. I hope that's
that makes because it's hard a little bit for me to play devil's advocate because I think I am a naturalist. I think so, but I haven't thought about it too much. So in regards to so a big one that people like to say, I like to come at naturalists with is consciousness.
Yeah.
How do you explain consciousness?
So I'm an identity theorist. I just think that consciousness is events happening in your brain.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what you should. Well, you don't have to say that. Like you could be a dualist and still be a naturalist. It's just you would think that the kind of mind stuff was somehow naturally occurring. Maybe it's a kind of separate ingredient somehow that's involved in natural causal reality. I don't like that way of thinking about our beliefs, desires, intentions, experiences, and so on. I'd rather see them all as kind of centrally having to do with stuff that our brains are doing.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Like, because I just can't get past the fact that if consciousness is not from our brain, I just don't know how. Like, if I take a Valium, I'll probably calm down. If I drink alcohol, I'll probably get drunk. If I can affect my conscious experience through substance, which is physical. If I drive a spike through my brain, I'm probably not going to be talking to you. There are characteristics, there are mechanistic things that are happening there.
So dualists can say, well, what's happening is that you're kind of messing with the connections between the mind and the brain. Right. So while I don't think anyone denies that there are ways in which you can do physical things to impact the quality of your consciousness, like by getting really drunk, for example. Although some people deny it. I mean, I've spoken to some people who say when they're really, really drunk,
they're great drivers.
Well, no, not that, but there's part of them that's just the same as it always is.
Yeah.
That they can sort of take a stance on drunken them from the perspective. I actually don't believe that, but some people, I know people who've said things like that. And you mentioned it before, that the mere presence of consciousness in the universe is somehow or other an indicator that the universe is made by God, because those people presumably are thinking that God's conscious. Of course, there are Christian traditions like the Thomists don't think that God's conscious.
Oh, okay. So, interesting. I didn't even know that. Is there, and even we could even remove God from that part of the conversation and just say there's something spiritual woo-woo happening. There's something. The fancy new word is people will misuse quantum mechanics and say everything's connected. They'll misuse things. Something spiritual or woo going on there. And I had someone once try and challenge me on my naturalist kind of surface level perspective, and that is by saying that they believe that everything is consciousness and there is no matter, and they said because everything comes to, this is a kind of a Rupert Spira kind of Deepak Chopra kind of thing. Yeah. And the idea is that everything is consciousness. Like we experience everything through consciousness. We don't have the ability. So anything that we think is outside of consciousness is unjustified. So this table is within consciousness because I have to experience it within consciousness. So they believe it's like a consciousness first model of reality. And I was like, how do you falsify that? I was trying really hard. I was like thinking, how could you falsify something like that? And then I realized
well, from my limited thinking about it, and again, when I say thinking, not like how you guys think, where you actually, not proper philosophy thinking, but just on the car to work. And I thought, I don't think you can falsify it. But then I was like, so could I build a naturalist version that you also couldn't falsify? And then I did. Well, I think I did, which is basically, I just say there is no consciousness, and I say whatever it feels like is just things happening in your brain, and we've labeled it, but that thing that we're labeling isn't a thing that exists. And so when someone says, what is it like to be a rock? I think it was Thomas Nagel or someone said, what is it like to be a rock? Well, I go, it feels exactly what it's like to be a rock. They don't have the ability to feel like, it's a bit of a silly take, but I used it as a retort against this, what I thought was an unfalsifiable claim, which is consciousness first.
So I would worry more about the question will be, is there just one consciousness so that you and I really aren't distinct from one another?
Yeah.
Because that seems to go against, I mean, what's going on when we're having this conversation and we're disagreeing? If there's just one consciousness, is it disagreeing with itself?
Yeah.
Is it so severely confused? Right. So it seems like there are many centers of consciousness. And now there are all these questions about the kind of differences in our experiences that we can report to one another that seem very mysterious if there's, because where do the experiences come from in the first place? Presumably they need causes. But so this will we'll kind of get closer to the chase, right? We agree that there's a computer monitor over there because we're experiencing, this is their story. But why are we experiencing a computer monitor right now? I mean, the most economical explanation is there's a world in which there's a computer monitor, light scatters off the screen, we see it, right? They seem to have a miracle all the time, constantly, about the things that are happening in your consciousness. Why those things? Why not other things? Where's it coming from? And if you go, oh no, there's a God, and God's putting all this stuff into your consciousness, right? Is that a more economical explanation than there's a world with trees and computer monitors and whatever, and your brain is, your consciousness is just your brains, the events in your brain related to the processing of signals like light signals scattering off the surface of the monitor. Right, that would be the direction. Something like that would be the direction that I would want to go in. And I think that the idea that consciousness comes first is way wrong. Consciousness is a very late comer on the scene. Maybe 500 million years ago, consciousness first appears in some tiny little worms or something like that. Maybe it's much more recent than that, because we're not really sure about, if an organism that's got 150 neurons, maybe we aren't yet really sure about whether it's it's conscious or not, whether there's something that it's like to be that kind of roundworm. I'm very confident that there's something that it's like to be a cat, for example. Cats are clearly conscious.
And this also goes...
I mean, kind of interestingly, there were Cartesians who denied that. They thought that cats were just little robots and there was no consciousness.
I've read a bunch of, I read some books by, he's a real famous philosopher from Australia. You probably met him, Singer?
Peter Singer.
A vegan, his books on veganism and things like that, and he talks about how they used to dissect dogs and laugh at people who thought that the yelping had anything to do with it.
So this is true. Hume, and this is one of the good things about Hume, thought that those people were just vicious. And to deny consciousness to dogs or cats or whatever was just obviously lunacy in his view.
It's and then you go down all the vegan memes, from that that perspective, if consciousness and taking away life of a conscious animal and things like that. But when you say what it's like for something to be, is that B part? Is that something that actually exists? Or do you think it's an explanation for the neurons bashing around our head.
So I'm an identity theorist. I think that the bashing around of the neurons just is your consciousness.
Yeah.
Right. So what it is to be conscious is just to have certain events happening in your brain.
Yeah.
And so you could try to eliminate consciousness to say there's no such thing as consciousness, but that's kind of weird, right? Just from our ordinary experience, like when I'm asleep, I think I'm not conscious. Certainly when I got knocked out, when I fell, there was a period there where I wasn't conscious. And then I was again. So I'm not inclined to go the eliminativist route. I'm quite happy with the idea that we're conscious, but I don't think that that's a kind of independent part of us, right? It's what it is to be conscious is just for certain things to be happening in your brain, which are happening whenever you're awake. Maybe they're happening when you're dreaming. There's kind of interesting recent work sort of where scientists communicate with people who are rapid eye movement dreaming, right? And so if you can, so the way that the people communicate is by rolling their eyes. So they're asleep, but you can ask them questions and they can communicate back. So maybe there's some sense in which we're conscious even when we're dreaming, right? But that kind of study is in its infancy. I don't quite know where it's going to go.
There's a lot of atheist memes, kicking around, 10 years ago, where I think Sam Harris was a popularizer of this idea where, there's a surgery where you can cut the brain. You have to cut the synapses in the middle of the two halves of the brain, and then people who survive it have the ability to answer questions by pointing and then by speaking, like something like I might be getting the.
Okay, so this was supposed to be evidence that you could have two centers of consciousness associated with a single brain. I think that the evidence for that is pretty sparse, actually.
Oh, okay, all right.
I mean, it's true that you can sever the corpus callosum, and when you do, under sort of special conditions, you can discover that there are certain things that are controlled by one side of the brain and certain things that are controlled by the other. But I don't think that you get that kind of evidence of people who are conflicted because one half of the brain is telling them to do one thing and the other half's telling them to do the opposite.
I think the question was, they asked them, who would you vote for, and they would point to someone and then they would speak someone else, the question was, do you believe in God? And they would say no and point to yes, or yes and point to no.
Yeah.
And the question, the atheist meme was always, well, is half the brain going to hell and half the brain going to things like that.
So like lots of things, further research is needed to find out exactly what the state of the science on this is. But my kind of understanding is that philosophers, as they often do, tended to exaggerate what the science actually says.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of clips I wanted to show you. This one here goes for 2 minutes, and it's just a lady on a train kind of explaining her position on religious people. And I was hoping you could kind of give your thoughts on her perspective from a philosopher's point of view.
So what's your take?
I don't think people are actually religious.
100% disagree.
I think the people that are religious are the fundamentals that are blowing up and banging down doors. Those people actually believe it. But I believe in God, but I let people live their lives.
Oh my.
Bull. I quit eating sugar. I've told every single one of my friends about it to try and help them get off sugar. If I thought they were going to burn in hell, I would be shaking them awake in the middle of the night and being like, accept Jesus into your life, please.
Okay, so you're going to say no one's being extreme enough.
Because they don't believe it. They don't buy it. If I thought that if you died, you would go to hell forever in a horrible place with Satan doing to your ass or whatever, that'd be the first thing I said to you. I'd be like, how's it going? Are you religious yet?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know? People talk about keto. People talk about so many things all the time. If you thought that there was a God and there was a heaven and hell, people would not shut the fuck up about it.
Right. They would really be trying to convert you into a pious person.
My aunt, she is religious.
What has she done?
She texts me every day. Please,
to remind you?
Please accept Jesus.
So the people that come knock on the door and they say...
The fanatics, the people who we deem crazy...
Those are religious
These motherfuckers being like, I'm a Christian, but gay, I love gays. No. You don't get to make caveats. You don't get to believe there's a dude in the sky orchestrating shit. It's so delusional. It's crazy.
So you think that in order to be religious, you have to be essentially a fundamentalist?
You have to be one of the people on the train that are like crazy.
What about a person that's like, I go to church every Sunday?
Fuck you. You.
What about the Jewish guys that don't do the thing on Friday?
None of the Hasidics, none of those people actually believe it.
So no electricity is not enough for you?
No, you just because you obey these laws, that's like me obeying the law that I don't, vape on the train or whatever. It doesn't mean I believe in it.
So does this drive you nuts?
It drives me nuts.
So you're just looking at people and you're like,
Liar.
liar.
I had sex with a guy who's like a dedicated Muslim, and I was like, nobody f***s me who believes in Allah. No way. This heathen with lesbian
And
mothers.
he was like, I'm Muslim. And you were like, no, you're not.
No way. You're not Muslim. You just like the rugs or whatever.
The vibe.
The vibe is great. To be a part of a tribe is great. But they don't actually believe in the doctrines.
Do you celebrate Halloween?
I love Halloween.
A bit of a kind of sporadic and humorous kind of take, but what are your thoughts on that?
So, about 20 years ago, there's a philosopher who wrote a paper in which he argued that no one believes
Yeah, okay.
religious beliefs. So his name's George Ray. He's at the University of Maryland, or at least he was the last time I checked. And his claim was that people's behaviour shows that they don't really believe the things that they claim that they believe. So, kind of example he gives, when people are going away on a holiday to a luxury resort, you don't break down in tears and despair. But if you've told that they've gone to heaven, you nonetheless grieve very deeply. And there seems to be a weird inconsistency. I'm not saying anything about whether these are good arguments or not. This is just the kind of thing that he says. It's not a million miles away from what we just saw, though. I mean,
More crass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. People, if they really, so the idea is if people really believe the things they say they believe, they'd be behaving differently. I mean, according to this person, they'd be much more concerned to try to get other people to believe. But in actual fact, lots of religious people are very concerned. It's just you have to be strategic. Certain things, like harassing people, doesn't tend to make them change their minds. And so, it's a kind of problem with what we saw on the video, right? That it's not the strongest case that you could make that religious believers don't really believe what they believe. But George Ray has, you can go and read his paper, makes perhaps the best case that you can. I don't think he's right. I think that religious people typically really do believe the things that they say that they believe. I mean, I have lots and lots of religious friends and colleagues, and I just think it would be totally weird if it turned out that they didn't believe the things that they told me.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I think I really like, I'm not sure if I mentioned this off stream or on the video or off the video, but you said something, or maybe it was on your, let me just pull up the quote. It was on your Wikipedia. It was, one of the things that is true about everyone is that their beliefs have a lot of commitments that they haven't yet noticed.
Right.
And I think that people maybe compartmentalize parts of their brain, or their brain just does that, and
so that's another way that's another way of trying to fit the kinds of things that were on the video and that George Ray appeals to. They really do believe them, but they
just haven't like really sat down and thought, oh wait, Mary's going to hell. And, It's it's a tough one. I remember I ran a small group at a Jesus kind of Bible study at my school when I was a teenager, and I remember we had all these new people come in, and the whole time my little message at the start was like, all our friends are going to hell, and what are we going to do about it? I'm really sad about this. And everyone's just like, well, the new people were like everyone who was Christian was like, oh, but the new people were like, this is culty. This is kind of weird. But yeah, you as a believer, you kind of stuck in this position where you can't wake someone up screaming in the middle of the night, are you going to go to hell? Because
Well,
that's
it won't work.
Yeah, it won't work. Yeah.
But I mean, you are like you may have a kind of missionary obligation, but you should be smart about it.
Yeah, exactly.
You should use effective tactics. Right.
Yeah. We did some fun stuff. I'll tell you about one time if we have more time, but to try and do that. So the next clip I've got, this is the last clip. This is just 1 minute from. Do you know Ricky Gervais and? Do you know Ricky Gervais?
Oh, I know who he is. Yeah.
So he's got a philosophy degree. I don't know if you knew that. So a lot of his jokes are quite philosophical, crass as well.
So just before you start, there are a lot of comedians who have a background in philosophy. It's not surprising.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I think this is the most interesting joke. So a Holocaust survivor eventually dies of old age and goes to heaven, and he meets God, and he tells God a Holocaust joke. And God goes, "That's not funny." And he says, "I guess you had to be there." Isn't that amazing?
What is that? Is
I
that
don't
yours?
know. No, not mine, no.
Where'd you hear that?
I don't know where it is.
You heard that though?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it's so layered and philosophical.
You're so layered.
That he wasn't there, and if you believe he was, he didn't do anything.
Right. Oh my God.
I've got a thing in my thing about praying.
That's a novel in a joke.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
I've got a thing about I'm accused of arrogance because I don't pray.
Uh-huh.
And I say, what could be more arrogant than praying to the God who didn't stop the Holocaust,
Right.
thinking he'll help you find your car keys?
That's right. You're on the other.
Yeah, so I mean, I love that clip. I think it's funny, but I think it's an interesting point. And I remember part of my deconstruction. I remember thinking like God in the Bible parted the Red Sea to save his people, but then kept the gates of Auschwitz locked. You know what I mean? And it made me kind of go. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to be praying for your car keys or to get to an interview with Graham Oppy on time, but then to a God who didn't stop the Holocaust or to stop these horrible things from happening. And it kind of talks a little bit about the problem of evil in that as well. What do you think?
Yeah, so there's all of that, right? It does seem really strange to think that God's going to pay attention to petitions to find car keys. That just seems really odd to me. Get on with living your life. You might think.
Yeah. There is a lot of people though who do get who say that without God they wouldn't have made it through XYZ.
Yeah, and I'm not going to dismiss that. That what they say could well be true. And there are lots of people whose lives are very unfortunate, and the people who help them turned out to be religious people. And sure.
Watching a bunch of your interviews, and one of them you said that when you were younger you liked to argue with people about God, and that's what kind of got you interested in philosophy. That's correct?
Yeah,
right?
that's correct.
Yeah, and so for me, if someone has a strong faith in their God, I will, and they're not interested in being challenged on that, unless if they're being bigoted towards racial or LGBT community or something, I'll hammer them. Usually, I don't care. But in regards to like just a normal person who isn't hateful and loves their God and gets a lot of hope from them, I'll tend to encourage them in that direction rather than to try and persuade them out of that. Where at the start, when I first kind of deconstructed, I was running around going, I need to talk to people about this, So have you changed in that?
So maybe I've changed a bit. And I'm not really interested in changing people's views. But I was always happy to argue with people who wanted to change my view. And that seemed fair enough. Yeah. And there's any number of people who fall into that category.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you had any conversations with street preachers or where?
So I've had conversations with people knocking on the door.
Right. I love it. I love them. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But it's very unlikely that I would end up in a conversation with a street preacher. I mean, they would have to approach me.
Yeah. I've had that happen to me, and it ended with me I asked politely not to have a conversation 2 times. They kept persisting, and it eventually ended with them yelling at me that God's going to harden my heart as I kind of just walked away and said, "You must have already done it," like so. Yeah, there have been times like that, but I've had Jehovah's Witnesses knock on my door a few times, and I've asked them to come on to Deep Drinks, and they always say no, and I go, okay, fair enough. You got a faith, you want to share it, but you're not willing to do it publicly. It'll make the church look bad if it turns out bad, or whatever. So
yeah. And that's fair enough.
Yeah, of course.
Too.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there are, in the evangelical churches, there's training for people who are going to be preachers, right?
Yeah. So I thought we could rapid fire some quick arguments. Some quick arguments for the existence of God. And I was wondering if what you could do is if you could explain what it is and then explain why you don't accept it. In as concise kind of way as possible. Right. So we've got like 6 of them that I've written down. So I've called this section arguments and why they fail, but of course you wouldn't use that language. You'd say why I'm not convinced, or you know. Yeah. So arguments why they fail. Metaphysical / cosmological arguments. Why don't you think they're sufficient for God?
So there are many different cosmological arguments. We could talk about the Kalam cosmological argument, or we could talk about Aquinas' second way, or we could talk about a kind of Leibnizian argument from contingency, and there are others. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. So we'll go Kalam cosmological argument. So whatever begins to exist has a cause of its beginning to exist. The universe began to exist, so there's a cause of the beginning to exist of the universe. There's a cause of the universe that's coming into existence. And, I mean, I'll leave out further steps. That cause is God. But plausibly, if there's a cause of the universe, you might think it's going to turn out to be God. There are naturalistic stories you can tell on which that's not the case. But, right, anyway. So that's the argument. What's wrong with that particular argument? Well, let's go with what's wrong with the cosmological arguments, the kind of metaphysical cosmological arguments generally, is that there's a gap between the conclusion that you get to, there's a cause of the existence of the universe, and that being is God. And that gap always turns out to be really hard to fill in. Right? So imagine, in this particular case, that there's a multiverse, and it's infinite in the past, and every now and then a kind of bubble nucleates in the multiverse and becomes a universe. And there's something in the multiverse, the kind of spatial background, that causes the nucleation of the bubbles. So now our universe has a cause of its beginning to exist, but it certainly isn't God, right? So the idea that we can get from the universe, that from the premises of the Kalam argument we get to the existence of God doesn't look very plausible. You might also think that there are problems with the premises of that argument, and I think there are. I don't think that we can rule out infinite regress. I think infinite regress would be weird, but you can't rule it out. The whatever begins to exist has a cause of its beginning to exist won't be true if the universe begins with a necessary initial state. Right? That will be the beginning, but there won't be any cause for it because necessary things don't have causes. They don't need them. Right? So so from a naturalistic point of view, it's kind of overdetermined. There's a bunch of different reasons why you'll think that the argument doesn't work.
Yeah, I have issue with the word begins to, because I feel like that's just slipped in there to kind of safeguard God.
Well, you might think that it's slipped in there, or you might think, well, actually, it's a feature of the theistic position.
Yeah.
Right? But depending what begins means, it might turn out that God begins to exist. Right? There's some trickiness, as you just said, about beginning, because you might think that God's the first cause, right? So God doesn't have a cause. God doesn't begin to exist. God's a necessary being, right? But in that sense, you can take the same view about the universe. So you could accept the premise that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Of its existence, and just say, but God doesn't.
Yeah.
God doesn't begin to exist. God doesn't have a cause, right? I mean, you can say the same thing about the universe. It doesn't begin to exist. It doesn't have a cause.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Teleological / design. The universe's order, fine-tuning, and information look more the result of intention than blind.
Okay, so there's a bunch of these arguments. Two, for a long time, pretty much up until Darwin, most people thought that the complexity of things like the human eye were just directly evidence for a designer, and the designer would have to be God. I mean, there's a bit of a gap there. But after Darwin, that argument about the human eye, most people think looks kind of pretty weak, because we think that there's an evolutionary story that takes you from a very simple photosensitive patch to the fully blown eye without any intervention at any point of anything outside the natural order. There's other design arguments that refer to the so-called fine-tuning of the physical constants in the universe. So there are physical theories which say that there's a range of constants, and if the constants had varied just a little bit, the universe would have been very different. It would either have only lasted for a tiny fraction of a second, or it would have blown apart really rapidly. And in either case, there wouldn't have been, and now you can put in whatever you like, there wouldn't have been life, there wouldn't have been human beings, there wouldn't have been stars, there wouldn't have been beetles, whatever. Now, is that an argument for God? It's, even supposing that it's true, because it's controversial. It certainly looks as though it's true, but we don't have any agreement on the kind of true model of the universe yet. And there's always this possibility that new maths and new modelling will get rid of the constants, or explain them somehow or other.
Yeah.
That's possible.
I tend to think of us as, two Greeks sitting there wondering where the thunder's coming from, and one of us is Zeus. That's where I feel like we're at with this, we're discovering things about the universe at the moment that is so far beyond our perception, our understanding, that any kind of rationale that we have for them now doesn't cut it. But that's okay.
So that's one kind of response. A different kind of response is to go back to what I said about the initial state of the universe being necessary. If the constants take particular values in that initial state, then it turns out the values are necessary and they don't need a further explanation. Right? Most people, when I say this, find it not entirely satisfying, because they want a story that explains why the values are exactly as they are, rather than slightly differently, where things would have been very different. But that question doesn't arise if they couldn't have taken a different value.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Or alternatively, if there's multiverses, we could just be in one of the universes that have...
So that's the other way. If it's a multiverse, you can have a random assignment, and most universes just
don't have
are squibs or very explosive, and every now and then you get one that's in the Goldilocks zone, and maybe you get life in some or all of them. Maybe you get stars in some or all of them, whatever it is that you...
But it's also kind of infuriating, that point too, because if the universe is fine-tuned for anything, it's fine-tuned for the creation of black holes. You know what I mean? Which is like,
okay, so
as a designer that comes...
So I said beetles because Haldane, the biologist, was asked what lessons he thought he'd learnt about God from his study of biology. And he said, well, the Lord seems to be inordinately fond of beetles, because there are thousands and thousands of different species of beetles.
Yeah. That's actually brilliant. That's actually really good. What about moral / axiological? So objective moral values, duties, and human dignity are best grounded in a personal, perfectively good source.
So for various reasons, I think I mean, given the story that I told about what naturalism is, that one good option for naturalists is going to be to think that there's a class of moral truths whose status is much like the status of mathematical truths. They're just necessary, right? And there's no explaining why they're necessary. The kind of fundamental mathematical truths couldn't be otherwise. But it's not like there's something that makes them be that way. They just have to be that way. And so I think it's plausible, for example, that it's just a kind of necessary truth, that it's not okay to kill your infant children. And then there's a little set of brackets, except if it's permissible, which, for example, for the Inuit, when the survival of the entire community was threatened by the addition of the extra infant, they would practice infanticide. But absent special conditions, it's not okay all the time. Just, you know, your neighbours, your friends, they're just not open slather, right? And I don't think of, I'm inclined to favour a view which just says this, that is either itself a necessary truth or it follows from something that's a necessary truth, a fundamental necessary truth. Naturalists have lots of other options. You can be a subjectivist, you can be a kind of response-dependent theorist, you can be an eliminativist like Mackie and say that there are no moral truths. There's lots of different ways you can go, and naturalists have different temperaments.
Where are you at?
So, well, I'm of the kind of necessary. I think that probably there are necessary truths. You don't need God, you don't need anything to make them necessary. So as a view, it's not kind of more expensive than the theistic view. And theists face certain difficulties, like with the Euthyphro objection, that suggests that they may be independently committed to the idea that there's a necessity that attaches to moral truths anyway. Right? You know, the question about why God picked these particular, to promulgate these particular moral truths that are promulgated in the various scriptures around the world. One thing is that God just made it up, but then they look arbitrary. A different thought is they were true independently of God and God was just reporting them. But if they're true independently of God, theism's not giving you any advantage. Right, so that's kind of roughly where I sit on the questions about morality.
Do you have an issue with, well, you would, but what's your issue with my perspective, again, surface level, is that morality might not exist as we think it does, and it's probably just people operating within their preferences. So
right, so that's a view which could be a subjectivist view, or it could be a kind of eliminativist view. Really, there's no such things as obligations and so on. It's just that lots of us living together, trying to manage our preferences, we've evolved this sort of system of this fictional system.
That's what feels
that we
right
use
to
manage it, right? And that's another one of the naturalist positions that's on the table. So, for example, Richard Joyce, who's based somewhere in New Zealand, runs a kind of moral fictionalism of roughly that kind. That's not the way I'm inclined to go, but I think my position really is an outlier on this. I think that naturalists tend more towards things like eliminativism than they do towards the kind of objectivism that I'm quite happy to go with.
Have you written about this?
Not much.
Okay.
And we've strayed out of my real areas of expertise at this point.
That's fine.
So I've said online in various places that that's the way I'm inclined to lean, and I've probably said in some of my writings, like in a paragraph, but that this is the way that I tend to lean. But I don't have enough of a well-developed position to really want to say more than that.
That's okay. So this is the last question, and it's a question I ask most guests who come on, and it's a bit of a silly one, so I hope you bear with me. But let's say there's a magic, well, we're going to say magic, but let's say it's a philosophical ball that tells you if something's true or not. or it tells you facts of the universe. And it tells you that one of the world's religions is true in its entirety. Where are you placing your bets?
So I get asked this question.
Oh, really?
A variance of it.
Yeah.
Quite a lot. So I don't have a favourite. Like I don't think that there's a religion that's kind of more likely to be true than any of the others if you kind of consider them pairwise and you make a ranking. I'm just going to end up with a whole lot of things that are kind of tied equally. I assume that we're placing our bets on which one's true.
Yeah.
Right, because it's a different question.
Which one do you want to be true?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's what's the way I normally phrase it, because I normally interview theists, is what's the most plausibly true religion that you don't believe in?
Yeah.
And that gets them to kind of think, well, they can't choose the one they believe in, so they have to okay, what's the next best likely option? And I think it's fun because it brings an analytical approach into a more faith-based kind of question.
Yeah.
So do you have an answer for that, or are you not sure?
Well, I started out by saying no, I don't have an answer to that. I think that it would be quite common for naturalists not to have an answer to that question.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Graham. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'll see you another time.
Thank you.
Okay.
As the tiers are changing, I want to give a final thank you to the larger financial backers of Deep Drinks podcast. So one last time, let me personally thank the very special Jason Rollins, Matthew Monga, Digital Hammurabi, and Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels. Some of these guys have their own YouTube channels, links in the description.